Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing a kind of random thread of thought that I've picked up on recently, and that is disembodied hands. So, I mentioned this concept briefly in my review episode of Cutchin and Renner's fantastic series of books, Where the Footprints End, specifically a section from Volume 1 where they discuss the prevalence of disembodied hands in relation to Bigfoot and poltergeist phenomena. Now, that kicked off a memory I had of a story that my grandma told me when I was little. For some background, my grandma grew up on a farm in southwestern Wisconsin, so it is a fairly rural area, and to this day there's actually quite a few Bigfoot reports that come from that region. Now, when she was a little girl, she remembered hearing someone say that a big hairy arm had burst in through a neighbor's window. So you can imagine my surprise when I'm reading Where the Footprints End Volume 1 and see the section entitled Disembodied Hairy Hands, which I will also say is required reading if this sort of thing interests you. So just from that collection of, more poltergeist and Bigfoot type reports, I started really thinking about the prevalence of disembodied hands in general. Now there's this fantastic case that kind of sits on the boundary from John Keel's Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, where in 1966 a woman returned to a ground floor apartment at McGuire Air Force Base and saw that her window was open and a pair of very pale hands with very long fingers was resting on the jamb. Now, technically, we wouldn't really say this is necessarily disembodied hands, because then the air police did actually give chase to this really strange guy with his sweater pulled up over his head. So, is that really technically disembodied hands? That's all she noticed. She didn't mention a figure. I think it's one of those that sort of sits on the boundary, but that it did warrant discussion here. Now, there are two cases from Vallee, however, which definitely are simply disembodied hands. One occurred in 1950 near the Loire River in France, where a woman was walking home from the store. She was happy, singing a nice little tune, when all of a sudden she was blinded by this light, and a pair of coppery hands actually attacked her. Now, she claimed that these were disembodied hands. They didn't even attach to arms or anything else. They were simply just kind of in the air in front of her. Now, Vallee also tied this to another case from Russia, which unfortunately is undated, where this woman was sitting in a window when suddenly two dark hands reached out and grabbed her and tried to pull her outside. When she looked back, all she saw was this vague, diffuse shape where the body would be. Now, when the window was finally rushed by the family dog, the hands withdrew, and the girl's father, upon hearing this commotion and her screaming and everything, ran with gun in hand and saw the dog simply barking at this empty space in front of the window. Now, Vallee, like Cutchin and Renner, did note the prevalence of disembodied hands in discussing the two above cases and tied it to strange happenings observed in CITED, Normandy in the mid-1800s, including sightings of a disembodied hand that hit children, not the most pleasant thing in the world. So to move along from the kind of nondescript to the supposedly ghostly, we have the hairy hands of Post Bridge, Dartmoor, which are said to cause accidents on this particular stretch of road. Victims of the hairy hands claim that a pair of disembodied hands shows up and tries to grab the steering wheel from them, driving their car off the road. Cases of poltergeist phenomena also include the appearances of disembodied hands. In the 1600s, the Ringcroft farm in the Scottish region of Dumfries and Galloway was beset by a lot of strange manifestations, which began, folklorically enough, with the displacement of cattle. Now, after this initial event, bizarre spectral manifestations broke out, poltergeist phenomena, even unexplained fires. Among these disturbances, there was also the appearance of a disembodied hand. Although the extensive Japanese taxonomy of spirits, known as the yokai, tend to popularly include the Manakate no Yore, the welcoming ghost hand, or the disembodied hand of Hanako-san, the bathroom ghost, most researchers agree that these seem to be kind of more modern inventions, more in line with urban legend than very old traditional folklore. And in contrast to both of those, traditional Yore, or ghosts, are often portrayed with lifeless hands dangling from the wrist. More on that in a moment. Also, from Iroquois folklore comes the oniatan, or dry fingers, which is said to be a disembodied mummified arm that particularly engages itself in punishing wrongdoers through death, disease, or blindness. Now, again, technically this is about disembodied hands, and this is a little bit of a step away, but I think it warrants discussion here. You also have countless accounts of just strange entities which have very human-like hands, particularly something noted by Linda Godfrey. There are tons of dogman or man-wolf accounts where people say that it looked like they had clawed hands as opposed to dog-like paws. In addition to this, tons of UFO-related entities, quote-unquote aliens or extraterrestrials, still have the same kind of 5 digits that we do. There are many cases where they do not, but again, we see that crop up a lot where they have very human hands. So the appearance of hands with paranormal entities or disembodied hands in relation to paranormal activity, my question is, what is up with it? What is up with this icon of the hand that it shows up consistently throughout folklore and paranormal occurrences? So the first thing that really stands out to me is what a very human symbol the hand is. It's argued that it is probably one of the commonest and oldest symbols of humanity, transcending cultures and time periods. From there, it can also be argued that it really is a symbol of our ability to enact our will upon environment, to externalize our force of will. And this really occurred to me actually looking at the flip side, the limp hands of the Japanese yuri. What you see here is a symbolic inability to enact your will upon the environment. This is exemplified in the common plots involving these ghosts, namely that they can no longer fulfill their desires, and so they need to find someone among the living to do it for them. Usually this has to do with performing funeral rites or tying up loose ends, unfinished business, all of that. On the other hand, no pun intended, the prevalence of disembodied hands in folklore and paranormal encounters does seem to encapsulate the concept then that these entities have the ability to interact with and act upon environment. And it's intriguing because many of these encounters with specifically disembodied hands seem to be very evident of a physicality. You can't simply say it was solely subjective or hallucinatory. It's very evident of the ability to interact very physical. So could it be said then that in these very physical encounters, the human mind is responsible for masking them in one of our oldest icons? Now, for me, the most important concept showcased by the prevalence of disembodied hands in paranormal phenomena or folklore, it really seems to me to be a symbolic tie between us, the collective unconscious, some of our oldest symbols, and these apparently separate entities. Put simply, a symbolic tie between us and the other. Well, if you enjoyed this video on disembodied hands in folklore and the paranormal, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with whatever else I might possibly have going on my website, justanothertinfoilhat.com, and for exclusive content, be sure to check out my Patreon page, which is also listed under Just Another Tinfoil Hat. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.